Hi Ash, I've made a lot of response videos to you lately, and you've talked with me in the comments about it. That's something I actually appreciate about you. The fact that you watch people's response videos and engage in discussion with them even when they don't agree with you. Actually, I don't really have a problem with you as a person, Ash. It's really more of what you do and your ideology that I have a problem with. Even though I do tend to make fun of you a lot, you of course have the right to state your opinions, but you're not just stating them as opinions in your videos, you're presenting them as facts to susceptible young people, mostly middle school and high school age kids. And it's perpetuating all of these myths that leave people with so many fundamental misconceptions about what it means to be transgender. Like so many people seem to do these days, you confuse gender, gender identity, and gender expression roles. Even more alarmingly, you also confuse general insecurities with your body and social anxiety with the very real and debilitating condition of gender dysphoria. This creates a huge misunderstanding of what it means to be transgender. So let's clarify a few terms, shall we? Gender is the sex of your brain. It is not a social construct. The reason that transgender people transition is because they have the brain that is opposite of their body, or the gender that is opposite from their sex, hence the term transgender. And transgender people want their brain to match their body, so they transition. Everybody who's not transgender is cisgender. And here's where I really get pissed off by the stuff you've been saying recently. You've been saying, oh, I'm not cis, but don't accuse me of claiming to be trans. I don't identify as trans. But not cis means trans. You're essentially trying to covertly imply that you're trans without directly saying it. Oh, and by the way, there are only two genders, just like there are only two biological sexes. Intersex is not a third sex, so if anyone turned out to have an intersex brain, that would still not be a third gender. And here's where everybody gets confused. Gender identity is whatever random labels you want to slap on. It has no significance in your life, or anybody else's life for that matter. It has nothing to do with transgender people, contrary to popular belief, because it is not your gender, it is your gender identity. But you keep calling your gender identity your gender like it's the sex of your brain, even when there's not scientific evidence to back up all of these gender identities that you talk about. Finally, there's gender roles and expression, which don't really need any introduction. They just mean what clothes you like to wear or what interests you have, that are normally associated with one sex or the other. They do not make you trans, they do not make you special, they do not make you a third gender, period. Okay, now that we've clarified some terms, stop conflating all of these things when you talk about them. You're not helping anyone understand that any of these concepts are transgender people. In fact, you're just making everything more confusing for the people who watch your videos. Now here's the part that really pisses me off. You also have a tendency to conflate body image issues and social anxiety with gender dysphoria. Almost everyone struggles with body image issues, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't cause real suffering. So if you really are struggling with body image issues, Ash, I'm not trying to downplay that, but that is not the same as gender dysphoria. It is not the same as having your brain go against your sex characteristics. I'm sorry. And social anxiety is also not your brain going against your sex characteristics, but it's a very real condition that deserves attention and proper treatment. Based on your videos, it does seem that you legitimately have social anxiety to some degree, and that sucks. I've had to deal with social anxiety for most of my life, and it can make things like initiating conversations and speaking in public very difficult for me at times. But that condition is distinct from gender dysphoria. And it really annoys me when you call it social dysphoria. It is true that actual transgender people do have secondary social anxiety issues that stem from gender dysphoria, but they have to have the dysphoria in the first place. You can't just have the social anxiety by itself, because it's not dysphoria. Dysphoria is internal strife, not external strife. So why, may you ask, does this conflation get under my skin? It's because you're co-opting a medical condition. Imagine if someone went up to you and said, I have social anxiety, but I have no anxiety issues with interacting with people or with how other people perceive me, and I've never been diagnosed, but I have social anxiety because I identify as having that, and sometimes I kind of sort of feel like I might be anxious in social situations, so I demand to be treated just the same as you for social anxiety. Wouldn't that just make you want to slap the person in the face? Now you know how I feel when you make videos complaining about the length of your hair, or people calling you a fat dyke and claiming that that's the same thing as having body dysphoria. I really wish you would stop using the word dysphoria to describe those insecurities. There's something else that you've been saying in our conversations in the comments that I just really find hard to believe. Claim that all arbitrary labels that you slap on yourself are just you being you, and you have no agenda behind using them. I'm sorry, but there's just no way I believe that. You've written an entire book that explains LGBT, as well as a lot of made-up sexualities and genders that aren't LGBT, from an extremely biased perspective that has no basis in empirical evidence. People have started using your book as education, even saying in the comments that their teachers have used your book in school. You make videos almost every week explaining some new gender or sexual orientation, often reading from the book that you've written. Hell, you've told people that Trump would ban gay marriage, even though he said that he didn't really care what gay or trans people did in their personal lives. How do you not have a political and ideological agenda behind what you're doing? Whether you like to admit it or not, Ash, you are a propaganda artist. Though of course you're not solely responsible, many transgenders, including Milo Stewart, Riley Dennis, and even Varmint Coyote, who directly referenced you in the first video I ever responded to, by the way, have said that they've realized they were transgender once they heard about the misconceptions that you've been spreading. You've been one of the first to claim that people can be trans with dysphoria, and in doing so, you've inspired a large group of people to co-opt the label of being trans when they're not actually trans. A family member of mine who's recently claimed she's non-binary for not completely conforming to gender roles hangs out with a group of friends who are obsessed with this trans without dysphoria, non-binary nonsense, and she, as well as the majority of her friends, watch your videos and take everything you say as fact. And that's something I have a huge problem with. You present your feelings, which have no evidence to back them up, as facts about LGBT issues. And it's not just you. This is something that I've been seeing in general. Every time I try to look up information about LGBT-related issues, I always come up with SJW nonsense. So even though you're not completely to blame, there's no doubt that on YouTube, you're a big influence when it comes to LGBT issues. And for that reason, there are literally hundreds of thousands of people who believe the lies and myths that you spread. Even if there weren't an obvious ideological agenda behind all your labels, what's the chance that you're all of the crazy genders, sexualities, and preferences that you claim to be? Even if all those labels were based in fact, it would still be incredibly rare that you just so happen to be all of them. I'm not saying that you're not LGBT, clearly you're into chicks, but there's something that you have to understand. All of these crazy sexualities and genders are largely not LGBT. They're not. They're mostly straight girls who want to feel special, so they say that they're trans or a different gender or sexuality simply because they don't fit gender roles. All of this LGBTQIAPRQXYZ+++ stuff only came about recently. LGBT was a thing long before any of these crazy new identities were, and like I've said, all these new labels have no evidence to back them up, while being homosexual, bisexual, or transgender does. And though you're bisexual, Ash, and so I don't have a problem with you speaking on behalf of gay or bisexual people unless you're spreading misconceptions about sexual orientation like you are currently, you're not trans in any way. So please stop claiming to speak for trans people, or quote-unquote not cis people, as you like to say, because you're not one of them. And please, for God's sake, stop making this whole gender thing out to be a fun time. Being transgender is not fun in the slightest. Being gay or bisexual isn't a great thing either, but at least has a neutral effect and doesn't really cause any suffering other than potential discrimination. Being transgender in and of itself, however, is a painful and harrowing ordeal. Gender dysphoria is a debilitating condition that causes deep, visceral, internal strife, and it never really fully goes away. Though it does get better when you transition, which is a whole ordeal in and of itself. Stop telling people that being transgender is a fun time. Stop telling people that anybody can have dysphoria if they're slightly uncomfortable with their body. Stop telling people that they can be transgender or some kind of a third gender without having any dysphoria. Transgender people have a medical condition, and claiming that they don't is misrepresenting trans people and convincing other people that it's okay if they co-opt that condition. And I'm sorry, Ash. I know you probably mean well, but that is reprehensible behavior. That makes you an asshole. That is the major problem that I have with you. And I don't care how nicely you're saying it, or how much you want to make excuses for it. It is still disgusting, immoral behavior. It's something that transgender people don't deserve. They just want to transition and move on with their lives, and don't want to deal with all this unwarranted, unnecessary attention. And you're not trans, Ash. So stop pretending to be. And you should be grateful that you're not trans, because being trans is a horrible condition. Most transgender people would give anything to be the evil cis people that you keep mentioning. But no, you want to be transgender just so that you can get the attention. And that's a very unhealthy and somewhat childish mindset. That's like wanting to have appendicitis or something. So to conclude, Ash, though you may be a nice person, your ideology is anything but nice. You keep conflating gender with gender identity or expression and convincing anyone that they can adopt the label of being transgender without realizing the harm that it does to actual transgender people. You spread so many misconceptions, and it's very obvious that you have an agenda behind what you are doing, as much as you may deny it. So though I do wish you the best in your endeavors, and I'm happy that you recently married someone who you really care about, please stop presenting your emotions as fact, and stop telling people that they can co-opt a condition out of fundamental misunderstanding about what it means to be transgender. A misunderstanding that ironically is similar to the misunderstanding that actually transphobic far right-wingers have about trans people. And you're probably going to comment, well, I'm just stating my perspective on gender. But this isn't about your feelings or your opinions. You shouldn't be presenting your opinions as educational material, because that has misled almost an entire generation of young people to value emotions over reality. Sincerely, Matthew.
Feel the funk blast!